Did you know that Modern Witches has a Patreon community? There, you can join us at 2 tiers of paying membership and access our monthly coven circles, which are live online gatherings where we discuss our witchcraft and practice magic together and tune into what it means to be a modern witch at this deeply important planetary moment. We're so excited to be dropping a new Patreon exclusive, which are our mini magic episodes. These will feature practical magic, folklore, history of the craft, as well as ways to deepen your engagement and awareness of witchcraft in this precarious time. We hope to see you there, and if you aren't subscribing to the podcast, please do so now. Your comments, your reviews, they all mean so much to us. Find links to join our Patreon community in the show notes. Blessed be. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Modern Witches podcast. I am delighted to have Siri Vincent Plouff. Did I say your name right? I want to
Sort
say
of.
it. Okay.
It's
Can you tell me how
we
to
say
say
it
it?
Plouff. Yes,
Plouff.
so this is
Yeah.
funny. Sorry. We say it Plouff, but half of my family says Plouffe, so I almost never correct people.
Really? I love that there's
Yeah.
a split in the
Yeah, there's a
pronunciation.
yeah. So we're the Plouffe side or the Plouffe side of the family, but there are people who use Plouffe. So
Okay. So
either is
welcoming.
completely correct.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Well, welcoming Siri Vincent Plouff to our conversation today, the author of Queering the Runes. Uh, and I'm so excited to dig into your recent book and the course you're teaching on runes and heathenry, which I'm sure we'll dive
Yes.
into today. So thank you for being here.
Thank you
I,
so much for having me.
I'd love it if you could introduce yourself for our listeners.
Yeah, so my name is Siri. I am a queer witch, a queer heathen. I identify mostly as a Nordic witch. And I write books at that intersection. And oh my gosh. Yes, I'm also the host of the erstwhile Heathen's Journey podcast. It has been difficult to be consistent because of things as they are. And I also write fiction, and so I'm currently working on a novel, but
Awesome.
you will not see that for quite some time.
That's great. I love that. So being a writer is a big part of your creative life, is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, absolutely. I do also a lot of other kinds of creative projects, but writing is the main thrust of it and has always been.
Amazing. I'd love to hear about when you sort of had your first encounter with spirit, perhaps, or maybe when you first recognized yourself as a witch or a magical being.
That's a great question. Because it's very young for me. So I several things. I had a recurring dream as a child that was very magical. And I've had it sometimes as an adult as well. I won't share the details of that because it's very personal. So that was definitely a part of it. I always felt a little bit spooky because of that. But I actually grew up in a haunted house.
Mm.
Um, and so as a kid, I would do things like talk to the ghost and would take my friends ghost hunting. And we made a map actually of like the haunted locations in my hometown. And I don't know how much my friends at the time were um, playing pretend and how much it was real for them. It was very real for me. And so then when I was a teenager, I found out that witchcraft is something that people actually do. And I was like, holy shit, that's me. So I was actually initiated into a Wiccan coven at around 15 or 16, after having practiced with them for a little bit. And so that was my like more formal introduction to the craft. I don't really identify as Wiccan anymore, but I am really grateful for that experience because it taught me a lot about things like raising energy and planning ritual and kind of like the nuts and bolts of um witchcraft and ritual and all of those things.
Amazing. Yeah. You talk a little bit about that in the introduction of your book, and I really appreciated this kind of reflection on like this entry point of the craft being Wicca, but perhaps not it not feeling like something that was like sustainable, perhaps. Um,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have that experience with Wicca. And I'm not trying to judge or shame Wicca in any way, but I do think I think particular of my generation, perhaps, I think a lot of the resources that I had access to in terms of Wicca um, have really like evolved in the past 20 years.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and I'm curious, for me, my understanding of working with the runes is also really rooted in ancestry. So was there a part of your journey that involved kind of returning to your ancestral roots?
Yes. So after I'll kind of like share a little bit of that story. So I, you know, realized that Wicca wasn't quite the structure for me. There were some other like interpersonal things. I talk about this a little bit in the book,
Hmm.
as you mentioned. And so as an adult, I kind of returned to it as a solitary practitioner. And at that time, I didn't really have a specific kind of cultural home for my witchcraft, as it were. And that's something that I like to think about, right? Is like what are the cultures that are interesting to us or, in our ancestry that we can learn from and draw from. Um, and so this is also in the introduction of the book, but I was doing a ritual to connect with a goddess and specifically a goddess, because I wasn't sure, kind of like what pantheon I was like interested in, and deity work was, a big deal to me at the time. So I'm in this ritual. I've called Circle. I'm like calling out to a goddess that I want to work with, and Odin shows up, which is hilarious. And I mean, he showed up in like a very like we've got the beard, we've got the one eye, we've got the big hat, like the very like traditional kind of, or like I would even say like the American vision of what Odin looks like, right? And at the time I was like, well, I don't think that's really Odin. Like, that's probably just a mischievous spirit saying that they're Odin. And I was a little bit better that it was a god and not a goddess. But interestingly enough, at that point in my own journey, I was doing a lot of healing from like certain kinds of trauma and a lot of things. And I actually really needed a positive male presence in my life. And Odin is queer, and we can get into that. Um,
Hmm.
but so that was kind of how I got dragged into heathenry a little bit. And then as I was getting more, connected, this was sort of like the tarot boom, right? So I had been reading tarot for at least 10 years at this point, and suddenly everybody was reading tarot, and there were so many of these incredible indie decks being created. And so I wanted to be a part of it. And so I created my Northern Lights Witch Instagram account. I no longer use that name just for evolutionary reasons, not for any other reasons. And there was a huge online conversation, and I mean, this still remains to this day, but at the time it was like one of the primary, or not a primary, but like it was a really important conversation that was being had about cultural appropriation. And I really didn't want to cause any harm. I mean, I had been raised to use things like white sage in my practice. And so I stopped using white sage. I stopped, doing some of these practices that I had just been taught. Right. Um,
Totally.
yeah. And then I was like, okay, well, I guess there are these things called runes. They're right there. They are interesting. So I guess I'm gonna try to learn that. And then I got the opportunity actually to live in Norway for a summer, as a
Oh,
part of
cool.
my graduate studies. So then I really connected, and like my time in Norway was as at home as I have ever felt in my body.
Mm.
Like I felt safe and comfortable and home in such an intensely beautiful way, that I was like, okay, well, I really do need to focus on this. Like, this needs
Mhm.
to be a focus of my life. Um, and the rest is kind of history. I ended up, I don't know if you remember the blog Little Red Tarot, but I ended up pitching them the Heathen's Journey blog series, which then became the Heathen's Journey podcast. And it all snowballed from there.
Amazing. Um, I've sort of watched folks, white folks in particular, um, navigate the path of, not wanting to perpetrate harm or perpetrate cultural appropriation. And so they kind of swing into this really deep ancestral path reference. And that can take on a really boundaried approach where instead of learning about other cultures and practicing like respect and reverence for those cultures, they can really get like deeply rooted in this area that can tend to like be very rooted in whiteness and upholding kind of like a pure lineage, which is all kind of in the realm of white supremacy. So I'm curious. I know that Norse mythology does have this history of, or I should say, white supremacists have appropriated Norse mythology for their white supremacy. Um, and I'm curious, like maybe how you've interacted with that in the past, um, kind of just like the way you've navigated it, because it does seem to me, as someone who isn't of Norse ancestry, it seems kind of like this edgy area for practitioners to navigate.
Yes, and there are a lot of historic reasons for that. I actually am going to be giving a talk on white supremacy in heathenry at the Salem Witchcraft and Folklore Festival. So if
Oh,
any
great.
witches are listening to this, it is coming up in August of this year. So I will be giving a full kind of like big scope scale talk about the history of this, the individual figures who really like misappropriated this stuff early on, and I'm talking in the 1800s, right? So like this goes back
Mm-hmm.
really like pretty far in terms of our modern pagan movement. um I would not call the white supremacists who have appropriated heathenry and its aesthetics um like pagans all the time. Some of them are, some of them are not, and they're just kind of utilizing this as a
Mm-hmm.
pastiche.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's really important to know that. One thing that I did early on is I was very afraid to um, get to know people in person. I was very afraid to join heathen groups because I was like, oh, well, I'm not like this. I don't want to be like this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and eventually I found people that I felt comfortable with who also were anti-racist. And the thing is that, all you have to do is say, like, you know, you have to just decry the white supremacists in the movement, and that's not hard to do, right? It's like, this is wrong, actually. We don't have to play nice with them. And I think that a lot of heathens who are anti-racist and working against white supremacy have sort of taken that approach of like, we don't actually have to play nice with the white supremacists that are appropriating our cultural heritage and our pagan faith. Um, so that's one thing. Another thing is that again, it just goes back, historically. Like Carl Jung wrote an essay in the 1930s, the early 1930s, talking about the collective unconscious and kind of getting into some like metagenetic stuff. Um, where he basically said it is the spirit of Odin rising up in these Germans, and that is why they are so warlike right now. Which, you know, I could probably write an entire essay just about Votan and its impact over the years. But that definitely did have an impact. I mean, the Hitler Youth then began sort of like, um, identifying with Germanic natural culture. But it goes even back even further than that. It goes into the 1800s as the field of anthropology was being um, instated, was being created. And anthropology was about, the study of people, right? But it was also about what race is the best at this time. So you have a lot of eugenics and anthropology were kind of in bed with one another in the 1880s and 1890s, especially. And so the Nordic people were assigned the most white and therefore the most superior, drawing on ideas from Nietzsche of the Übermensch and all of that. And so that just meant that mystics who were white supremacist were like, oh, great, this is the thing that I will utilize. This is the thing that I can, appropriate, or this is how I'm going to color all of this. Um, and so heathens today are really working to undo that, working to make amends, working to uh, kick the Nazis out of the movement. One thing I do like to tell people who are interested in heathenry but are afraid of joining is, or, finding groups or whatever it may be. I like to say, hey, if anybody tells you that heathenry is a closed practice, it is not. That is probably a dog whistle
Mm. That's
of some
great
kind.
tip.
Yeah. Yes. If somebody is like, this is a closed practice or this is in our blood, specifically, there's a lot of like kind of connection or, thought about this. It's this idea called metagenetics, which is like, oh, like our ancestors, there's like something in the blood of the Germanic people. And I'm including Scandinavia in that Germanic, like the language group. So that also includes Scandinavia. So people will say, like, oh, there's something in the blood. And so, like, only people of this blood can access runic knowledge. And that is bullshit. Straight up, I will just say that that is bullshit and you should run if somebody is saying
Hmm.
stuff like that.
Good.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think yeah,
Uh,
the closed practice issue is so important, and I'm really glad that you like flagged that for our listeners. Um, because there's a way that we can move beyond these like gatekeeping practices that are deeply rooted in white supremacy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's really one of those things too where when I look at history, right, like there's a huge movement in academia with historians right now of like, hey, Europe has never been this white monolith.
Right.
There have always been people of color. So even if you're interested in diving deep into your own ancestral culture, as a white person, so for me, like I know that a lot of my people come from Norway specifically, but I also know that the Vikings, as they were traveling the world really, and they made it, they were in the Middle East, they were all over the place. Um, Essentially anybody could become a Viking of any race if they accepted the culture.
Hmm.
Um, and so we know that there were people who were, not white, who were involved or who, became moved to Norway or like became involved with the raiding groups. And of course, there's a whole lot of problems with going Viking and raiding and all of that stuff. I'm not glorifying that in any way. I'm just saying that this is a historic fact. We know that this is
Hmm.
true. Um, and so, even if somebody is like, well, this is, white people culture, what do you mean? Like,
Yeah.
where? Because there have always been people of color, in these places. And what does that mean to erase their aspect of their part of the history?
Hmm.
Another really important aspect of this that I have been looking at a lot recently is actually that there are, other tribes of indigenous people in the Scandinavian peninsula. So we have the Sami, for example, who, you know, um, have been historically persecuted and oppressed in that
Mm-hmm.
land. But what does it mean if you have two groups that are essentially from the same place, um, that are
Mm-hmm.
distinct culturally? What does indigeneity mean in that case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, which I think is a whole can of worms that I don't necessarily want to open up. But I think the other thing about closed practices that is often misunderstood, um, and this is coming from somebody in an open practice, so, listeners, please forgive me if I misspeak. Um, you can become a member of a closed practice. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
involves mentorship. It involves being a part of the community. It involves being, a um, true member of the community. And then, maybe you will be invited into things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or initiatory practices also. So, you could argue that an initiatory practice is a closed practice because you're not allowed certain information until you've gone through this initiation process, right?
Right.
And that's the kind of thing that, if you want to go for that, like you can find a group of, Wiccans. I'm thinking specifically Gardnerian Wiccans. There's more of that like initiatory aspect of things. You can become a member of that. It takes years at times. It's not overnight, and that's as it should be, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think there's something that people just need to know about, like, or we need to embrace community in all things here, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like if you're interested in these things, if this calls to you, then seek out respectful community.
Yeah, I love that. And I'd love to backtrack just a little bit and talk about your experience with Odin and your experience of Odin as a queer entity, because I've known a lot of rune practitioners that invoke different goddesses or like steer clear of Odin in their practice because of that sense of like them being extremely like a very masculine energy. Not to say that doesn't mean they're not queer, but I just love to hear your understanding of them and yeah, dive into that a little.
Yeah. Yeah, so I do use he, him pronouns for Odin.
Mm,
He's just a little messy, is kind of how I view it. um, and I do use they, them pronouns for Loki. So, like,
hmm.
just to kind of preface that.
Yeah.
So Odin, we know canonically that Odin was bisexual, for one thing. So there are times in the Poetic Edda, specifically, there's one, oh my God, what is the name of this? Um, Laufþrúðnismál, I think. Forgive me, heathens. The old Icelandic is not on the tip of my tongue, but there is a poem in which essentially Odin and Thor are engaging in what is called flighting, or culturally it was like playful insults. So they're just trading insults because Odin is in disguise and barring Thor from crossing a river. And so Thor is, like really going in on stuff, and it's kind of revealed throughout the poem that Thor knows who Odin is. Like he knows who this figure is. I kind of like to think of Odin, and I do sort of like to bring a lot of comedy into my practice just because I think it's more fun that way. I like
Hmm.
to think of Odin as like, in this case, he's like wearing a trench coat and maybe has a hat on and just like giggling, thinking that nobody can tell who he is, but like they absolutely can.
I
um
love that.
yeah. And Thor accuses him of being ergi. And this is right after Odin, boasts about how many women he sleeps with. And ergi, or ragi, is another conjugation of the word, essentially means unmanliness, and is one of the linguistic ways that we understand queerness in an Old Norse context, like in a medieval Viking context. And this is the word that, like, if somebody is called ergi in in that time period, you could challenge the person who called you ergi to a fight to the death. Um, to defend your honor or whatever. And I'm not saying this is good. I'm not saying this is a good way to be, but I am saying that this is how we can like the fact that this word exists, the fact that these kinds of laws existed tells us a little bit about queerness at this time and that queerness was alive and well. And so Odin is accused of ergi and does not deny it. And in fact, Odin is the bottom in the boy on boy action. Let's just put it that way. So we know that for sure. Odin also transgresses gender roles in interesting ways. I use he him pronouns for Odin because of my relationship with him in part. Like he is the god that first came to me and was like, "Hey, kid, like this is a thing that you need." But he also is just constantly interested in information and one of his major traits throughout the mythology is seeking information, seeking wisdom. You know, he travels the world in disguise to learn things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and one of the things that he wants to learn is Seether, which is it's a specifically a kind of Nordic magic that was associated deeply with femininity. There are a lot of reasons for this. But Odin becomes a Seether master because Freya teaches him. And he is called Ergi for this as well.
Mm.
Um, and to be clear, you know, for anybody listening, heathens do practice Seether today. Um, and while it is considered feminine, I also say that there is archaeological evidence that people of many different body types practice this, but it was primarily women's magic.
Mm.
So we do have evidence of cross-dressing Seether masters, and we also have it in the words. So the word Vitki was used for men who may practice Seether or who were otherwise magicians. We have Seether Kona, which is a seethe woman, um, or a vulva, being a practitioner of Seether. That's her specific form of priestesshood. But then we also have the Seether Barrender, which is specifically a gender neutral term, but it is combining Seether with a derogatory word for vagina. Um, that we know was associated with ergi men, in scare quotes, ergi men who practiced Seether. This word would not exist if it never happened. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
Like, so
That makes total sense. That's so fascinating.
yeah, so there's all of this interesting stuff, and Odin is really at the center of a lot of it. I mean, we have also, there was an archaeological find of a figure who was in traditional like women's garb of the era. I believe this is early Bronze Age or possibly pre-Bronze Age. So in women's clothing, but whose one of his eyes was scratched out.
Mm.
So people believe that this is Odin in, you know, see their costume or Odin wearing like women's clothing essentially
Mm.
on the
Wow, that's
high
amazing.
seat. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, people might look at it and say, "Oh, all father," you know, like, yes, absolutely. And my relationship with Odin is much more like, no, he was pretty fluid. I mean, there's a reason that
Mm.
Odin became Romanized into Mercury,
Mm.
um, who is, you know, famously trickster energy. Winifred, I swear to God, my cat is
Coming in.
coming in. So,
Very.
yeah, Winifred.
It is interesting too because my one of my understandings of Odin is his like thirst for all the magic,
Yes.
um, and his quest to gain all of this magical knowledge. And I think there's something listening to you talk about Odin and their queerness about Odin's desire and his ability to just be in that liminalness.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that is really interesting. It's So Odin and Loki also, I always like to talk about Loki as well because we have a very explicitly canonically queer figure in Loki, who is, constantly going through transformations, changing genders. Loki even was uh the bearing parent, the of Sleipnir, which is Odin's horse. So Loki is the one who births Sleipnir, after having turned specifically into a mare. So we do have a figure who is very clearly genderqueer, even in the Christian Icelandic mythology that still exists. We can't do without Loki's gender bending. Um, but Odin and Loki are also blood brothers. They are sworn to one another. And I think that that says a lot about Odin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if this was truly frowned upon, I don't think Odin would keep Loki anywhere near him.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting.
it's
I'm just
fascinating.
like, it is totally fascinating. And I feel like there's just like that boundary breaking element of Odin that I think is
Yes.
like really shining through as you're talking, which is really, I don't know, queer and amazing. Um,
Yeah. I would
but
recommend for,
mhm,
people who are like afraid of the masculine side of Odin because it is a very
yeah.
masculine energy. I'm not going to lie. Like, there is a reason I still use he, him pronouns for Odin, even though we know all of these things. But he is incredible for helping guide you when you're researching. I mean,
Mm,
for a lot of things that Mercury would do for you in your practice, Odin is also interested in. So, like, Odin will help you find resources that you need, for example. Odin is very good at navigating systems, at navigating bureaucracy. So, if those are things that you struggle with, you could also approach him from that angle. And also, of course, is the rune master. He's the reason we have runes.
beautiful. So, yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, my understanding of working with the runes is that you magically, spiritually do invoke a deity as you approach the runes, typically Odin. Is that in your practice, or how do you kind of approach working with deity and working with the runes as a divination tool?
So I actually think that in my own practice, Odin is, of course, very important, but I also approach the Norns, who are the sort of like a lot of people akin them to the Fates in Greco-Roman myth. They are the ones who can help to guide you. So their names are Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld. And I translate those names to Ord being that which is, aka the past, the things that we cannot change. Verdandi is the moment of tension that is the present and ever evolving. And Skuld is what should be, the action that you should take if you are acting within your morals and values. So you don't see like the future, you see consequences of your actions. And I think that's a very, as somebody who's been a professional reader, right? Like that's a very important distinction to make. Um, so they are very important to approach as well when you're learning the runes. I also, because I come at this from such a this is an open practice. This is not a closed practice. You don't have to approach deity in order to work with the runes. I think that's really important. I have had students in my classes who um don't work with Nordic deities at all. But for some reason are just like these keep coming up and I need to learn about them. And I'm like, all right, cool. So let's do it. And the thing is that as long as you're doing it with an understanding of the cultural context from which they come, I think that that is important to me, right? So like don't just pick up a book and be like, okay, like, you know, um Othala is correspondence A, B, and C, so therefore I can use it for these things, because that's a very simplified and not as rich understanding of the rune as you will get if you understand kind of like the culture from which they developed. But that can be taught,
Mhm.
like you can learn these things, and then also you can decide in your own practice, okay, so maybe, um Othala means legacy and family and lineage. Um, and this is what those things mean in Nordic culture. Okay, what does this mean in um, Greek? How do I translate this to like a Greek pantheon? Or how do I translate this to my, indigenous background as well? How do I work with this in a very specific way? Because I think that ultimately, when you're a diviner, um, you have your own relationship with your tools. And just speaking as somebody who's taken clients over the years, right? Like people will come to me for a very specific reason. They'll be like, all right,
Mhm.
Siri is the oracle that I need for this because Siri knows and does XYZ.
Right.
Um, and I do the same thing, like when I have a question that I can't resolve on my own or that I don't trust myself to be, um, non-biased about in my own life. I have readers that I go to, and there are some readers who are very good at like predictive sort of future seeing. There are other readers who are just very good at calling me out on my bullshit and like calling me into healing, So like,
Right.
um,
And there are
yeah, I just
other, I mean,
encourage.
I'm feeling called to share, like, I've gone to work with practitioners who work in like Afro-Taino Caribbean divination and spirit work.
Yes,
And I didn't know why, but when I had that reading, I knew exactly why. It was like that person meant to deliver this message to me, right?
exactly, exactly. It's funny you should mention that because so last week, Tarot in Other Words came out, which is a collection of essays on queer tarot. I have an essay in there. It was edited by my dear friend Cassandra Snow. We wrote Lessons from the Empress together. We are in deep. So we were both at the launch event for that. And one of the other, so another fantastic contributor, and I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm on stage with you right now, is Junauda Petrus. And she is the current poet laureate of Minneapolis. But we got into a little conversation on stage where, so she's Black and she was talking about cowrie shell reading and
Mm.
bone reading. And I was like, oh yeah, really similar principles. Like like you can if you understand runes or bones, or you can kind of understand how a casting might work.
Mhm.
So yeah, like I love it.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful to be able to like have those cross-cultural conversations. And I think divination is one of those deeply human like drives to me as a divination specialist. It's like this is how we have survived over millennia. This is how we have interacted with each other in the world, the earth itself. And so it makes total sense that like we're going to continue to evolve these practices as we continue to evolve culturally and share our practices with each other.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I'm curious, there was one question I wanted to ask for our listeners, because I think there's this really interesting difference between casting, as you were saying, and pulling tarot cards or a spread. And I'm wondering if you could just like speak a little bit into that, the different quality of that.
Yeah, so casting to me feels kind of like, all right, I am letting the Norns take the reins,
Mm,
right? It's, the person that I'm reading for has a question, or I have a question. I'm just going to throw these runes and I'm going to see how they land. And so when I'm reading runes on a cloth, I am looking at them and I'm looking at the different shapes that they're making. I'm looking at the different clusters. I maybe have different partitions of the cloth assigned to different meanings. So like what runes land in which quadrant or whatever, what have you. Um, and so it can be very, it can be both very precise and also very poetic. Um, because I don't, have as much control over the specific placements. You can read runes like you would read tarot too. It just means, you have a specific spread that you're pulling runes for, and you pull them out of the bag rather than cast them on the cloth. Um, students often ask me, like, do you have any preferences for, rune sets? And I say, all right. The cards are beautiful. You can find rune cards out there, but they do not read in the same way. So definitely get the actual like stones or bones or wooden runes. Like get the things that you can actually throw as you're learning them. And then later, if you decide that you want to read with runes in a certain way, then you can get the cards or whatever. But I do think it's important to have that experience of like actually casting them on a cloth, because it does read really differently. Tarot for me is very incisive. So as a reader, we all have different personalities, right? So like as a reader, I am extremely blunt. And I thrive in that really quick 15-minute reading because when I read, it's kind of like, well, I said what I said. I'm not going to say it differently, or I'm not going to, like beat around the bush. Like I said what I said. Very kind of Queen of Swordsy, as Cassandra would say. Um, and I find that
Sometimes
tarot
we need
really
that, you know?
right. Yeah, exactly. And I think that tarot really thrives in that because specifically, so like if somebody comes to me and they're, ambivalent about what reading, like I use for the reading, and they have a very specific question about like, say, job searching, I'm gonna grab my tarot cards rather than my runes because my tarot cards were created in, the 1400s and 1500s and have a history that is within, the realm of more modern life, whereas the runes are a little bit more esoteric in their source. So if somebody has just like a really practical question, I'm like, all right, cards it is. Sometimes I'll even grab playing cards because playing cards are even more like, predictive in that way. Um, there is no perfect divination method, and I think that it's good to have many different kinds of divination methods under your belt, especially if you take clients. Just because sometimes, different questions call for different um, methods of answer.
Absolutely. And I think that, when somebody has a question and whatever method you're using is kind of like hitting a blunt note, is how I want to describe it. It's like resisting answering the question.
Mm,
That's when it's can be so nice to like pick up a pendulum or turn to your runes or whatever it might be that you're using, um, and enter into it in a different way. Um,
yes, I
yeah,
fully agree with you. I often, even if somebody booked a rune reading specifically, I'll often bring tarot cards or something to, if there's like a question that comes up or like, what do they mean specifically? Like, I understand that you said what you said, but like, but what does that mean? It could have a couple different, I could take this in a couple different ways. Then I'll pull some cards to like help
totally.
elucidate that.
Mm, thank you for that. Um, this has been such a rich conversation, and I just appreciate your depth, um, and generosity. Um, I'm curious if you could leave our listeners just with a suggested sort of magical tool that they could take with them
Ooh. Um,
or
well, of
practice
course,
that you're loving right now.
yeah. Of course, the runes are there to help guide you. The book Queering the Runes is written for anyone at any level. So if you have no prior experience or knowledge of the runes, you can pick up the book and have a pretty thorough understanding of them by the end. But it's also written so that if you already have learned the runes in a certain way, you can gain new knowledge or new information.
It's a very
So
rich resource. I just want to
Thank you.
say that, and I like appreciate all the magic you add into it too. So,
Thank you. Thank you so
hmm
much. In terms of something that you can just start doing that you don't have to read a book about, to start bringing into your life, one thing that I have been doing lately is dedicating actions to a purpose. So, this is something anybody can do, and sometimes the simpler the action, the better. But let's say that I have been struggling with, clarity of conversation or, struggling with, misunderstandings at work or something. I might dedicate the actions, and my dishes are piling up. So I might dedicate the action of doing the dishes to speaking clearly. And then as the dishes are becoming more clean, as I am getting to what I like to to as sync zero, um, the spell is coming true. So it is as clearly as I can do this, I can also do this other thing. Um,
love that.
and yeah, and it's really accessible for, anyone, like no matter your abilities, or, your spoons that day. As somebody who has a disability, like I know that um sometimes a lot of magical practices can feel um like, wow, that is just so much energy. You mean I have to get the silver chalice and the athame and the, amethyst that was bathed under the full moon in Scorpio or something, like I have to get
hmm
all of these things.
Yep.
What do you mean? um, so yeah, so right now I'm leaning into practices that are easily accessible. And I know that for people who are being targeted by, the Trump administration, we have very little bandwidth. We are in coping mode. We are exhausted. And so the simpler magic can be really effective. And what you are doing is you are adding to a general stream of, magic that can assist you in your life. But you're not having to extend all of the energy that may be necessary.
Mm. Yes, simple, practical magic is extremely important right now,
Yeah.
as we're all being taxed in these various ways and need
Yeah.
our energy to go in various places.
Yes. Thank you for, yes, I know that that was probably meant to be like this is a quick question, a quick answer,
Oh,
but
no,
I
this was
do ramble.
great. This was great. I
Okay.
feel like you were really picking up on my energy before we recorded today. I was like, there's dust everywhere in my life. And I needed to like really set the intention, like altars cleared of dust means clear mind, clear spirit. So I really appreciate it. I think it's an important thing to highlight today and
Yeah,
moving forward.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'd love it if you could share where folks could find you, follow you, support you.
Yeah, so very exciting. The Queering the Runes course, which is an in-depth, like partially pre-recorded, partially live experience, is the portal is reopening, as I like to say, on the solstice. So if you're really interested in runes and want this perspective, you can sign up there at lore-books.com. There'll be a link. I'm also at sirivincentplouff.com. You can find a link there too. Um, the books and everything are available on my website, lore-books.com. Social media is really freaking weird right now.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't
so
like it
I would
there
Yeah, right?
personally.
It feels very cursed in a way that I don't like. I'm a millennial. I grew up on the internet. I like social media, but like it feels very cursed right now.
Yeah.
So I would recommend signing up for the newsletter
hmm
and the Patreon. So depending on what is happening for me at the time that this is released, um I have tiers on my newsletter that are the same as Patreon. I know that some people just really don't like the interface of Patreon, so you can choose where to support me. It's the same content. The same tiers get the same content across both places. And on Patreon, I do also share public posts as well. So if my Instagram account is being eaten by the algorithm, um,
Yeah.
because I do
Good way to
have an
put it.
Instagram account. But like if everything is being eaten by the algorithm, like at least Patreon posts are still there.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm on Blue Sky. I like it there. I'm goofy there.
Yeah. I'm on Blue Sky too. I don't really understand it yet, but I'm there. I'm like,
I'm
what are we
just
doing here? I like it.
Yeah, I'm just kind of using it like I used to use Twitter, which is like half shit post and like half like this is my life as a writer. I really love
Yeah.
microblogging.
Fun. Great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited for folks to tune in, join those newsletter lists, and enjoy what you have to offer coming up. Thank you so much,
Thank you so
Siri.
much.
It was a real pleasure.
Thank you so much, Casey. This was great.
Thank you for tuning in to the Modern Witches podcast. We hope you've been inspired to cultivate your own magic and to craft your own spiritual practices. Let us know what sparked your curiosity by leaving us a comment on this episode or leave us a review. And don't forget to subscribe to the show so that you never miss an episode. Your feedback and engagement truly fills our cups. If you're looking for more ways to gather with your fellow witches, please support our work on Patreon. Learn more at modernwitches.org. Blessed be.